When we're talking about LG smartphones, there's one line of devices from the company that simply can't be overlooked. And of course, I'm talking about the G series. My personal history with the G series is short. I only owned a G3 and a G6, but I still feel a personal connection to the G family, so today I'm going to be going back to where it all started, the LG Optimus G. Sometimes referred to as the LG G1, the Optimus G was really LG's first smartphone to compete in the high-end smartphone space. Prior to its launch in 2013, LG phones were well known for being affordable and budget-friendly, but if you were looking for a high-end device, you'd probably take your money elsewhere. With the Optimus G, however, things begin to change for LG, as you can see by reading reviews of the device. CNET's review title says it all, and the sentiment is repeated throughout other reviews like Android Authority's review, which said, quote, "This so far is the best phone that LG has ever produced." And yeah, it's easy to see why all eyes were on this phone. Immediately after unboxing this phone, you'll realize it's not just any old LG phone. Up front, the Optimus G has an impressive 4.7-inch display with capacitive illuminated back, home, and menu buttons that you really won't notice unless illuminated, which lends to the clean, minimal look. Around the sides of the device, the fancy design continues to impress with metallic edging, silent low-profile power and volume buttons, a 3.5mm headphone port, micro USB charging port, and 2 Torx screws, hinting to the fact that the battery is indeed non-removable. Around back, the Optimus G ditches standard plastic for Gorilla Glass with a fancy design which gives it a much more premium look and feel compared to other devices of the time. Of course, that raised the question of durability, but you really can't have both. It's gotta be one or the other, and I'd say this beautiful design makes up for any possible fragility as a result. Just put the Optimus G next to its successor, the LG G2, and if you ask me, the G2 is a downgrade in terms of how it looks. But people just weren't ready for an all-glass design with non-removable battery, so LG had to compromise a bit with the later G series. If you ask me, the G series design suffered until the G6, one of my favorite LG phones of all time. But that's a subject for another video. Returning to Optimus G, this design is one of LG's most premium, even more so than the Prada line. I'd even go so far as to say this phone is more deserving of the Prada name than the Prada 3, a pretty unassuming device from LG the previous year. Getting to the software side of things though, I'm not so, you could say, optimistic. If you've used an Optimus device before this, you will feel at home. That is to say, there's nothing really new here. And as usual, LG software just isn't that polished. It's borderline ugly if you ask me. The default app drawer background, for example, is clouds? Is this Windows 95 or something? I mean, you can change it, fair enough, but who's really gonna think to do that? It's hard to really explain, so let me just show you an example of what I think is a good design, and that would be HTC's Android skin at the time. Next to the Optimus, there's a big difference in design, and few people would argue that LG's is better. Sure, HTC's design is outdated by now, but at the time of peak Android, this is really how I feel Android was supposed to look. I guess the LG UI is easy to use, so as long as you don't care too much about aesthetics, you probably won't even be bothered by it. One thing that did bother people though was that the Optimus G didn't run the latest Android, something anyone who's ever used an LG device will probably understand. The Optimus G runs Android 4.1, which was several months old at the time, and that's not flagship level stuff. It didn't really matter though, because the Optimus G boasted a top-of-the-line Snapdragon S4 Pro processor and 2GB of RAM, plenty for whatever you'd need in a smartphone at the time. Performance was definitely not a weak point for the Optimus G, something it was often praised for. Even in 2023, this phone still feels pretty snappy and responsive compared to other devices. Install Opera browser on the Optimus G and it's fully capable of browsing the modern web. Even YouTube is watchable up to 1080p with absolutely no issues. Of course, Google has officially discontinued support for any Android versions below 4.4, so sideloading old versions of apps is going to be your only options of getting any apps running on this phone. I did get some games going on here, and for the most part they play very well, thanks to the powerful processor. Apparently all this power did come at a bit of a cost though, with reviewers from the time mentioning the battery life being a weak point here. LG does give you an option to tone down that power a bit with the quad-core eco mode. I'm not too sure exactly what all it does, and I didn't really notice much of a slowdown when eco mode was enabled, but I'm assuming it just puts a cap on how much juice those quad cores can drink. I can't personally say much about this battery since my unit unit is obviously over 10 years old. It seems pretty average for an old battery though, definitely not worse than any of my other old phones, maybe better if anything. But let's flip the phone around and talk camera stuff for a little bit. The Sprint Optimus G has a 13 megapixel shooter capable of some pretty good photos, especially compared to the other offerings from LG. Now, photos still have LG's signature over-sharpened and highlights blown way out look, but especially when using the HDR mode, photos are very colorful and sharp, good enough for the casual smartphone photo taker, but nothing mind-blowing. And it's got its quirks for sure. One thing that really got on my nerves is the shutter sound. There's no way to turn it off or even turn it down, so you're gonna be walking around making obnoxious sounds every time you take a photo. Maybe not a big deal to some, but this got on my nerves pretty fast, and to the point where I ended up just covering the speaker with my finger, especially in public places. It doesn't get rid of the problem for good, and it's a clumsy fix, but this speaker is pretty easy to cover up and it drastically reduces the volume. Speaking of that speaker, we've got some pretty average media playback features here, including a built-in FM radio app and a music playing app with some pretty basic features, but an extensive list of supported audio formats, including some pretty audiophile level stuff, making this a very good music player. The Optimus G does not, however, offer expandable storage, which seems like it could be a deal breaker with a device from this era, but with 32 gigabytes of built-in storage, that would probably not be an issue for most people. Back to audio, we've got a small rear-firing speaker that fails to really impress, being too thin and sharp to make an enjoyable listening experience. But it is just a phone speaker, and I've heard worse, so it's not something that most people are going to notice. And if that's just not gonna cut it for you, have no fear, the Optimus G's got you covered with a 3.5mm headphone port up top to plug in your headphones of choice, or use the earbuds included in the box if you're not too much of a hi-fi enthusiast. Not that these earbuds are bad, they're actually pretty okay, just a little thin like the Optimus G speaker. When you're listening to music with the headphones, you can turn on the Dolby Mobile effect, which is supposed to make audio quality better, I guess, but it's really not that interesting. So are there really any serious deal breakers that would make a 2013 smartphone buyer take their money elsewhere? Actually, no. My biggest complaints are really pretty small things, some of which can be fixed. Like when I said I don't like the LG skin over Android, easy fix, just install a launcher and icon pack and you can make it look 10 times better. And the terrible LG keyboard? Installing Gboard helps with that a little bit as well. Overall, I just can't find much of anything wrong with the Optimus G, and you know what? As crazy as it sounds, if Google still supported this version of Android so modern apps worked on here, even in 2023, this phone could go up against some of the modern ultra budget smartphones, which is pretty crazy that it's held up so well after all these years. Of course, we know how the rest of the G series went, which was quite popular, but unfortunately went downhill after the G6. Not that the G7 or subsequent devices were bad, other companies just had more momentum and outperformed, especially in North America. The story of LG is for another video though. The Optimus G has been an awesome device to check out and honestly one of the most underrated phones ever made. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.